The dungeon door slammed shut before Elena Voss could speak a single word in her defense. Torches flickered against wet stone walls as two guards dragged her forward, her wrists bound tightly in iron chains that bit into her skin. She stumbled, catching herself against the cold floor, and looked up to see the man who had ordered her capture standing at the top of the stairs. King Alaric Thorn did not come down to meet her. He simply watched. His golden eyes narrowed, his jaw tight with fury that had been building for days. Behind him stood Lord Callum, his most trusted advisor, arms folded, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face that Elena did not have the strength to question in that moment. "You will regret this," Elena said, her voice steady, despite the fear pounding in her chest. "I have done nothing wrong." Alaric's expression did not soften. "3 attempts on my life in 2 months, and every trail leads back to you. My guards found the poison ingredients hidden beneath your floorboards. You expect me to believe that is coincidence?" "I expect you to believe the truth," she said. "Someone placed those things there. I am a healer, not a killer." He descended 1 step, his presence filling the narrow stairwell like a storm rolling over the mountains. A healer who vanished from her village 3 years ago, with no explanation. A healer who arrived in my kingdom with no family, no history, and no one to speak for her character. "Tell me, Elena Voss, why should I trust a single word from your mouth?" She lifted her chin, refusing to let him see how badly her hands trembled beneath the chains. "Because I have spent every day since I arrived tending to your people. I have saved children from fever. I have set broken bones for farmers who could not afford another healer. Ask them who I am, not the whispers in your court." For a moment, something flickered behind Alaric's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, buried beneath the weight of his crown, and the fear that had gripped his kingdom since the first attempt on his life. "Take her to the lowest cell," he said to the guards. "She stays there, until I decide what is to be done with her." The guards yanked Elena forward, and she did not resist, though every part of her wanted to scream that this was wrong, that she had given up everything to serve this kingdom, and this was how she was repaid. As she was pulled deeper into the darkness, she caught one last look at Alaric's face. He was not smiling in triumph. He looked almost troubled, as though some part of him already sensed he had made a mistake. The cell they placed her in was smaller than the others, damp and windowless, lit only by a single torch bracketed to the wall outside the bars. Elena sank onto the cold stone floor, pulling her knees to her chest, and allowed herself one breath of despair before straightening her spine. She would not let this place break her. She had survived worse than a king's suspicion. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the distant drip of water somewhere in the tunnels, and the occasional footsteps of guards making their rounds. Elena used the time to think, replaying every conversation, every glance, every moment in the palace that might explain why someone would want her blamed for the attempts on the king's life. It did not take her long to arrive at a name. Lord Callum had never trusted her. From the moment she arrived at court, he had watched her with narrowed eyes, questioning her methods, dismissing her cures as tricks and superstition, even when they worked. He had access to every corner of the palace, including her small chambers near the healing wing. If anyone had the opportunity to plant false evidence, it was him. But knowing something and proving it were 2 very different challenges, especially from inside a locked cell with no allies and no voice anyone in power would choose to hear. As night deepened, Elena heard footsteps again. But these were different, slower, deliberate. She lifted her head and saw a familiar figure approaching through the shadows, a hooded cloak pulled over his broad shoulders. It was Alaric. He stopped in front of her cell, studying her through the bars with the same intensity he had shown at the top of the stairs, though now there was no audience, no advisor whispering in his ear, no court demanding justice. "You came to gloat?" Elena asked, refusing to stand, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. "I came to understand," Alaric said. His voice was quieter now, stripped of the authority he wore like armor in front of his people. "You speak with too much conviction for someone who is guilty. Guilty people beg, they cry, they offer excuses. You have done none of that. Perhaps I am simply tired of excuses that no one believes." He crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to her level, though the bars remained firmly between them. "Tell me honestly, if you are innocent, who would want you blamed for this?" Elena studied him for a long moment, weighing whether honesty would help or harm her further. But she had nothing left to lose. Lord Callum has never trusted me. He has always found a reason to question my presence in this palace. I do not know if he is responsible, but if you are looking for someone with access and motive, you need not look far from your own throne room. Something shifted in Alaric's expression, a flicker of memory or doubt that told Elena her words had landed somewhere important. He straightened, his features returning to their usual guarded calm, but she had seen enough to know she had planted something in his mind that would not easily be dismissed. "I will consider what you have said," he told her, though his tone gave nothing away. "That does not mean I trust you. It means I am not foolish enough to ignore every possibility." "Then perhaps you are not as blind as I first believed," Elena said. A ghost of something crossed his face, not quite a smile, but close enough that Elena noticed it before he turned and disappeared back into the shadows of the corridor, leaving her alone once more, with only her thoughts and the distant sound of dripping water for company. Sleep did not come easily that night. Elena drifted in and out of restless dreams, haunted by images of her village burning, of running through forests with nothing but the clothes on her back, of the reasons she had buried so deeply that even she sometimes struggled to remember them clearly. She had come to this kingdom seeking safety, seeking a place where no one would ask too many questions about her past. Instead, she had found herself at the center of a conspiracy that could cost her everything. Morning arrived with the same gray light filtering weakly through the corridor beyond her cell. A guard brought a small portion of bread and water, sliding it beneath the bars without meeting her eyes. Elena ate slowly, trying to preserve her strength, though hunger was the least of her concerns. By midday, she heard raised voices echoing from somewhere above the dungeon, too distant to make out clear words, but urgent enough that she recognized the tone of crisis. Something was happening in the palace, something significant enough to draw attention away from her captivity, if only for a moment. Hours later, a new guard arrived, younger than the others, with nervous eyes that kept darting toward the stairs, as though expecting someone to appear at any moment. "What is happening?" Elena asked, rising to her feet and gripping the bars. The guard hesitated, glancing over his shoulder before answering in a low voice. "Sickness, spreading through the western villages. They say people are dying faster than anyone can explain. The healers up top are frightened. None of them know what it is." Elena's mind raced immediately to symptoms, to causes, to the dozens of illnesses she had studied and treated during her years of training. What symptoms? Fever? Rash? Difficulty breathing? The young guard blinked in surprise at her sudden intensity. I do not know the details, my lady. Only that it is spreading quickly, and nothing anyone has tried has worked." Elena released the bars, her thoughts already spinning toward possibilities, toward the kind of knowledge that had made her valuable to this kingdom, before fear and suspicion locked her away. If people were truly dying, and no one could explain why, this was no ordinary illness. This felt deliberate, calculated, the kind of sickness that came from something planted rather than something natural. She thought of Lord Callum again, of his cold eyes, and his careful manipulation of the court's fears. A man capable of framing an innocent healer for attempted murder might easily be capable of far greater harm to secure his own position. As the guard hurried away to resume his post, Elena sat back down against the stone wall, her mind working faster than it had in days. If this illness continued to spread unchecked, the kingdom would suffer greatly, and countless innocent people would pay the price for whatever game was being played within the palace walls. She did not know how, locked away in this cell with no one willing to trust her, but she understood, with sudden and absolute clarity, that she was going to be needed. Whether Alaric wanted to admit it or not, whether Lord Callum tried to keep her buried in the darkness forever, the kingdom was about to face a crisis that only she might be capable of solving. All she needed now was the chance to prove it. That evening, footsteps returned to her corridor, heavier and more urgent than before. Elena rose to meet them, half expecting to see the young guard again with more troubling news. Instead, she found herself face to face with Alaric once more, though this time his expression carried none of the calm authority from the previous night. His eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, his shoulders tense with a weight that had not been there before. "Tell me what you know about sickness that spreads through entire villages within days," he said without preamble, his voice rough with barely restrained desperation. "My physicians are useless. People are dying, and I am told you may understand things they do not. Elena studied him carefully, recognizing the moment for what it was. A king, who had thrown her into the darkest cell in his dungeon, was now standing before her, asking for her help, because he had run out of other options. I might, she said slowly, choosing her words with deliberate care. But I will not help for free, not after everything you have done to me. Alaric's jaw tightened, old pride warring with new necessity. You are in no position to bargain. And you are in no position to refuse me, Elena countered, stepping closer to the bars. Your people are dying, Alaric. Every hour you waste arguing with me is another hour that sickness spreads further. So decide quickly. Do you want my help, or do you want your pride? For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the torchlight flickering between them, as the weight of the decision hung heavy in the damp air. Finally, Alaric exhaled slowly, something breaking in his expression that looked almost like defeat. What do you want? Elena allowed herself a small, careful breath of relief, though she kept her expression firm. A fair trial, once this crisis has passed. A true investigation into who really planted evidence against me. And until then, you release me from these chains, and allow me to work freely to save your people. Alaric studied her for a long moment, his golden eyes searching hers, as though trying to read the truth buried somewhere beneath the surface. Whatever he saw there seemed to settle something within him, because he finally gave a single, sharp nod. Agreed, he said. But know this, Elena Voss. If you betray my trust, there will be no cell deep enough to protect you from what follows. I understand, she said quietly. But you should also know this. I never needed a threat to make me care about saving lives. I simply needed the chance. Alaric turned and called for the guards, his voice carrying the same commanding authority Elena had first witnessed at the top of the dungeon stairs. But something had shifted between them, something neither of them fully understood yet, though both could sense its presence like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. As the guards moved to unlock her cell, Elena felt a strange mixture of hope and dread settle over her. She was finally free, or as free as circumstances allowed, but the true test still lay ahead. A kingdom was dying from a sickness no one understood. A traitor still walked freely within the palace walls, and the man who held her fate in his hands remained uncertain whether to trust her at all. Whatever happened next, Elena knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was not going to waste this chance to prove her innocence, and she was not going to let an entire kingdom fall because of fear, suspicion, and the schemes of a man hiding in plain sight. The chains fell away from her wrists, and for the first time in days, Elena Voss stepped forward into uncertain freedom, ready to face whatever darkness still waited within the walls of Blackthorn. A guard nearly collapsed at Elena's feet the moment she stepped into the western village of Ashford, his skin pale and slick with sweat, his breathing shallow and ragged. She dropped to her knees beside him immediately, pressing 2 fingers to his neck to check his pulse while her eyes scanned every visible symptom. How long has he been like this? She asked sharply, looking up at the crowd of frightened villagers gathered nearby. Since this morning, a woman answered, clutching a child close to her chest. He was fine yesterday, fine, and now look at him. Elena studied the guard's face, noting the strange blue tint forming around his lips, the way his hands trembled uncontrollably even as his body seemed to grow weaker by the second. This was not the pattern of any fever or plague she had studied. Diseases spread gradually, weakening the body over days. This moved too fast, attacked too precisely, as though something had been designed specifically to overwhelm the body's defenses within hours rather than days. Alaric stood a few steps behind her, watching with an unreadable expression as she worked. He had insisted on accompanying her personally, despite the objections of his guards who worried for his safety in a village gripped by unexplained illness. Elena had not argued against his presence, though she suspected his true reason had less to do with protecting his kingdom, and more to do with keeping a close watch on her. This is not natural, Elena said finally, rising to her feet and wiping her hands on a cloth one of the villagers offered. No disease I have ever studied moves this quickly, or attacks in such a specific manner. Someone did this deliberately. Alaric's expression darkened. You believe this is poison? I believe it is very likely poison, yes. But I need to examine the water sources, the food supplies, anything the village shares in common that could explain such a rapid and widespread reaction. He nodded once, sharp and decisive, before turning to bark orders at the guards accompanying them. Within moments, several men were dispatched to inspect the village well, the granary, and the small stream that fed into the surrounding farmland. Elena appreciated his efficiency, even if she still carried the bitter memory of iron chains biting into her wrists. As they waited for the guards to return with their findings, Elena moved through the village, tending to those who were already showing symptoms, offering what small comfort she could, while she waited for concrete evidence to guide her next steps. She noticed Alaric watching her closely as she knelt beside an elderly woman, gently coaxing her to drink water mixed with herbs meant to slow the progression of whatever toxin had entered her system. "You truly care for these people," he said quietly, almost to himself. Even after everything. Elena did not look up from her work. "I told you before, I did not need a threat to make me care about saving lives. These are innocent people, regardless of what happens between you and me." Something in her words seemed to settle uncomfortably in his chest, though he said nothing further, simply continued watching as she moved from patient to patient, with steady hands and quiet determination. By late afternoon, the guards returned with troubling news. The village well showed no signs of contamination, nor did the granary reveal anything unusual. But the stream, the one source of water shared by nearly every household in Ashford, carried a faint and unusual smell that one of the guards described as bitter, almost metallic. Elena's stomach tightened at the description. She hurried to the stream herself, kneeling at its edge and carefully collecting a small sample in a glass vial she carried in her satchel. The moment she brought it close to her face, she recognized the smell immediately, though it took her a moment to place exactly where she had encountered it before. "This is not something that occurs naturally," she said, rising to her feet with grim certainty. "Someone introduced a substance into this water source, a poison, carefully measured to spread through consumption rather than direct contact. Whoever did this knew precisely what they were doing." Alaric's face hardened into something cold and dangerous. Who would have access to poison this precise? This is not the work of a common criminal. "No," Elena agreed. "This is the work of someone with knowledge of alchemy, someone with resources and access to rare ingredients. Someone who understood exactly how to create maximum devastation while making it appear like natural illness." Their eyes met, and Elena watched as the same suspicion she had voiced back in her cell began to take firmer root in Alaric's mind. Neither of them said the name aloud, not yet, not with guards and villagers still within earshot, but the unspoken understanding passed between them clearly enough. That evening, back within the palace walls, Elena worked tirelessly in the small healing chamber she had been granted access to once more. She examined the water sample under candlelight, testing it against various herbs and reagents she had gathered over her years of study, searching for the specific compound responsible for such rapid and lethal effects. Alaric visited her twice that night, each time standing quietly in the doorway rather than intruding fully into her workspace, watching as she moved between vials and notes with focused intensity. He said little, though Elena could sense him observing not just her work, but her, studying the woman he had so quickly condemned, as though trying to reconcile the image in his mind with the reality standing before him. "You should rest," he finally said during his second visit, noting the exhaustion beginning to show in her movements. "You have been working since dawn. People are dying, Alaric. Rest can wait. Even the most skilled healer cannot help anyone if she collapses from exhaustion," he countered, his tone firmer now, carrying the authority of a king rather than the uncertainty of a man questioning his own judgment. "I insist. Rest tonight. Continue your work at first light." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to remind him that urgency demanded sacrifice, but something in his expression told her this was not a request she could easily refuse. Reluctantly, she set down her tools and allowed herself to be escorted to a small chamber near the healing wing. Though sleep did not come easily even then, her mind still racing through possibilities and compounds, and the growing certainty that someone within these very palace walls had orchestrated this entire crisis. The following morning, Elena returned to her research with renewed determination, and by midday, she finally identified the substance responsible for the mysterious illness. It was a rare compound derived from a plant that grew only in the northern mountains beyond the kingdom's borders, a plant known among alchemists for its ability to mimic natural disease while causing rapid deterioration of the body's vital functions. She brought her findings immediately to Alaric, who had gathered his closest advisors in the throne room to discuss the growing crisis. Lord Callum stood among them, his expression carefully neutral as Elena entered, though she noticed the slight tightening around his eyes when she began to speak. "The illness spreading through Ashford is not natural," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber. "It is caused by a rare compound found only in specific mountain regions, far beyond our borders. Someone imported this substance deliberately and introduced it into the village water supply." Murmurs rippled through the gathered advisors, questions and accusations beginning to surface as the implications settled over the room. Alaric raised a hand, silencing the chamber with practiced authority. "Who among our court would have access to such a rare and specific substance?" he asked, his eyes sweeping across his advisors with pointed intensity. Elena watched carefully as several of the men shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, though her attention remained fixed on Callum, who met the king's eyes with practiced calm, betraying nothing of whatever thoughts lay hidden beneath his composed exterior. "Your Majesty," Callum said smoothly, "surely this healer's accusations should be examined carefully before we begin suspecting members of your own court. After all, she herself stood accused of attempting your life mere days ago." The words landed exactly as Callum intended, drawing renewed murmurs of doubt from the gathered advisors. Elena felt her jaw tighten, recognizing the skill with which he redirected attention away from himself and back toward her, using her past accusation as a shield against scrutiny. "I am not accusing anyone without evidence," Elena said firmly, refusing to let his words shake her composure. "I am simply stating facts. This substance is rare and expensive, requiring specific knowledge of alchemy to use effectively. Whoever poisoned that village possesses both resources and expertise that few in this kingdom would have access to. And yet you seem remarkably knowledgeable about this substance yourself," Callum countered smoothly, his eyes narrowing slightly. "One might wonder how a simple village healer came to recognize such a rare and obscure poison so quickly." The insinuation hung heavy in the air, and Elena felt the weight of every eye in the chamber turning toward her once more, suspicion creeping back into expressions that had briefly softened during her investigation. She opened her mouth to respond, but Alaric spoke first, his voice carrying an edge of steel that silenced the room instantly. "Enough!" he said sharply. "Elena Voss has spent the last 2 days working tirelessly to save the lives of my people, while the rest of this court offered nothing but fear and confusion. I will not tolerate baseless accusations meant to distract from the real question at hand. Someone within reach of this palace possesses both the means and the knowledge to create this poison. I intend to find out who, regardless of how uncomfortable that truth may become for anyone in this room." Callum's expression flickered, just for a moment, before settling back into practiced neutrality. "Of course, Your Majesty. I meant no disrespect toward the healer's efforts. I simply believe we must proceed with caution." Alaric did not respond directly, instead turning his attention back to Elena. "Continue your investigation. I want to know everything about this compound, where it originates, and how someone might have acquired it within our kingdom's borders." Elena nodded, grateful for his support, even as she recognized the danger of the position she now occupied. Whoever was responsible for this poisoning had already demonstrated a willingness to harm innocent people to achieve their goals, and now that she stood in the way of uncovering their identity, she understood clearly that her own safety could no longer be guaranteed within these palace walls. As the meeting dispersed, Elena caught Callum's eyes one final time before he turned to leave the chamber. Something cold passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that whatever game was being played within this kingdom, both of them now understood exactly where the other stood. That night, as Elena returned to her small chamber near the healing wing, she found a folded piece of parchment slipped beneath her door. She unfolded it carefully, her heart pounding as she read the single line written in careful, deliberate handwriting. "Some truths are better left buried, healer. Continue digging, and you may find yourself back in that cell permanently, or worse." Elena stared at the note for a long moment, her hands trembling slightly despite her efforts to remain calm. Whoever had written this clearly wanted her to abandon her investigation, to retreat back into silence, and let the truth remain hidden. But Elena had come too far to turn back now, and she understood with absolute clarity that the closer she came to uncovering the truth, the more dangerous her position within this kingdom would become. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her satchel, resolving to show it to Alaric the following morning. Whatever threats awaited her, She was not going to abandon the people of this kingdom to suffer while a traitor hid safely within the shadows of the very palace meant to protect them. Elena's hands shook as she placed the threatening note on the table before Alaric, her voice steady, despite the fear still coursing through her veins from the night before. "Someone slipped this beneath my door," she said. "They want me to stop investigating the poisoning. That tells me I am closer to the truth than whoever wrote this would like." Alaric picked up the parchment, reading the words carefully, his expression darkening with each passing second. When he finally looked up, his golden eyes burned with quiet fury. "This is a direct threat against your safety. Whoever wrote this will answer for it." "Finding out who wrote it will not be simple," Elena said. "There was no signature, no distinguishing mark. Anyone within this palace could have written it. Then we will find another way to expose them." Alaric set the note down and rose from his chair, pacing the length of the chamber with restless energy. "You said this compound comes from the northern mountains. Someone within our kingdom would need connections beyond our borders to acquire something so rare." Elena nodded, her mind already turning toward the next step in their investigation. "I need to examine the palace records, trade documents, merchant visits, anyone who has traveled north in recent months. If someone imported this substance, there should be some trace of it somewhere within your kingdom's paperwork." Alaric agreed immediately, granting her access to the palace archives, a privilege that would have seemed impossible mere days earlier, when she had been chained within the darkest cell of his dungeon. Together, they spent the following days combing through ledgers, trade agreements, and correspondence, searching for any mention of northern merchants or unusual purchases that might connect back to the poison responsible for so much suffering. The work was tedious, and progress came slowly, but Elena found herself grateful for the distraction it provided from the constant weight of fear that had settled over her since receiving the threatening note. Working alongside Alaric revealed a side of him she had not expected, patient and methodical, willing to spend hours poring over dusty documents rather than simply commanding others to do the work for him. "You surprise me," she admitted one evening, as they sat together in the quiet archive room, candlelight flickering across stacks of aging parchment. "I expected a king too proud to involve himself in such tedious work." Alaric glanced up from the ledger before him, a faint and unexpected smile touching the corner of his mouth. "Perhaps I once was that king, but watching you these past days has reminded me that leadership means more than sitting upon a throne issuing commands. It means understanding the people you are meant to protect, even when that understanding requires getting your own hands dirty." Elena studied him for a long moment, surprised by the sincerity in his words. "That is not the man I met in the dungeon." "No," he agreed quietly. "That man was afraid, surrounded by advisors feeding him fear and suspicion, until he could no longer distinguish truth from manipulation. I am beginning to understand how easily that fear was used against me, and against you." The admission hung between them, heavier than either had perhaps intended, and for a moment, neither spoke, the silence filled only with the soft crackle of candlelight, and the distant sound of the palace settling into night. Their search finally yielded results 3 days later, when Elena discovered a merchant's ledger, documenting an unusual purchase made nearly a month earlier. A significant sum of gold had been paid to a trader known for his connections to northern territories, though the ledger listed only vague details about the nature of the goods exchanged. "This trader," Elena said, pointing to the entry, "he arrived at the palace gates during that time. According to this record, someone within the court personally authorized his visit." Alaric leaned over her shoulder, studying the entry carefully, his expression growing increasingly grim as he traced the authorization signature at the bottom of the page. "This signature belongs to Lord Callum." The confirmation settled heavily over the room, though neither of them seemed entirely surprised by the revelation. Elena had suspected Callum from the very beginning, ever since her first night in that dungeon cell, but seeing his name written in ink beside such damning evidence still sent a chill through her. "We need more than a merchant's signature," Alaric said finally, straightening and running a hand through his dark hair. "Callum is clever. He will claim the traitor visited for entirely legitimate reasons, unrelated to any poison. We need to find the traitor himself and confirm exactly what was exchanged." Elena agreed, though she recognized the difficulty such a task presented. Traders traveled frequently, and finding one specific merchant among the countless who passed through the kingdom's borders would require both time and resources they could not necessarily afford, given how quickly the poisoning had already begun spreading through additional villages in recent days. As if summoned by her worry, a messenger arrived that same evening, breathless and pale, bearing news that a second village near the eastern border had begun showing similar symptoms of the mysterious illness. Elena's stomach dropped at the news, understanding immediately that whoever was responsible had not stopped after Ashford, but intended to spread suffering across the entire kingdom. "We must move quickly," she said, already gathering her satchel of herbs and remedies. "I need to reach that village before the illness progresses too far to treat effectively." Alaric insisted on accompanying her once more, and within the hour, they rode together through the darkened countryside, the urgency of the crisis pressing heavily against them both. Elena found herself grateful for his presence, not simply for the protection his guards provided, but for the quiet strength he offered, without demanding anything in return. The eastern village proved even more severely affected than Ashford had been, with nearly a dozen villagers already showing signs of the poison's rapid progression. Elena worked tirelessly through the night, administering what remedies she could to slow the toxin's spread, while searching desperately for a more permanent cure. It was during this exhausting work that she noticed something unusual, a detail she had overlooked during her initial examination of the poison's effects. The compound seemed to interact strangely with a specific combination of herbs she had used previously to treat unrelated ailments, weakening its potency significantly when introduced early enough in the illness's progression. "This could work," she murmured to herself, quickly preparing a fresh mixture and administering it to one of the more severely affected patients. Within hours, the man's symptoms began to stabilize, his labored breathing gradually easing as the poison's grip on his body loosened. Alaric watched with cautious hope as Elena continued refining her treatment, testing it carefully against each new patient who arrived seeking help. By dawn, she had developed a reliable method for counteracting the poison's effects, provided treatment began before the illness progressed too severely. "You did it," Alaric said, genuine admiration coloring his voice as he watched her finally allow herself a moment of exhausted relief. "You found a cure." "Not a permanent solution," Elena corrected, though she could not hide the satisfaction in her own voice. "This slows the poison's progression and allows the body time to recover, but we still need to identify and stop whoever is responsible before more villages suffer the same fate." As word of Elena's success spread through the eastern village and beyond, something shifted within the kingdom's perception of her. Villagers who had once viewed her with suspicion now spoke her name with gratitude, sharing stories of the healer who had saved their loved ones from a mysterious and deadly illness. Even some of Alaric's advisors, upon hearing reports of her tireless work, began questioning the accusations that had led to her imprisonment in the first place. But not everyone within the palace welcomed this shift in perception. When Elena and Alaric returned to the capital several days later, they found the atmosphere within the court noticeably tense, whispers following them through every corridor they passed. Lord Callum, in particular, seemed increasingly agitated, his careful composure occasionally slipping to reveal glimpses of something colder and more calculating beneath the surface. "He knows we found the merchant's ledger," Elena observed quietly one evening, as she and Alaric reviewed their findings once more in the privacy of his private study. "I can see it in the way he watches us." "Then we must move carefully," Alaric replied, his expression grave. "A cornered man becomes dangerous, especially one with resources and connections we may not fully understand. I have already sent men to track down the northern trader, but until we have concrete proof linking Callum directly to the poison, accusing him openly would be reckless." Elena nodded, understanding the delicate balance required to expose a traitor embedded so deeply within the kingdom's court. But even as she agreed with his caution, she could not shake the growing unease settling within her chest, a feeling that time was running short, that whoever was responsible for this poisoning would not simply wait patiently while their scheme unraveled around them. That unease proved justified sooner than either of them expected. Just 2 nights later, as Elena worked alone in the healing chamber preparing additional remedies for the villages still struggling with the poison's effects, she heard the soft creak of the door behind her, followed by footsteps too deliberate to belong to any casual visitor. She turned quickly, her heart pounding, only to find a hooded figure standing silently in the doorway, watching her with an intensity that sent immediate alarm rippling through her body. Before she could call for help, the figure lunged forward, and Elena barely managed to sidestep the attack, knocking over a table of glass vials in her desperate scramble away from the assailant's reach. "Guards!" she screamed, backing toward the far wall as the hooded figure advanced steadily, saying nothing, revealing nothing of their identity beneath the shadow of their cloak. Elena's hand closed around a heavy mortar sitting nearby, and she swung it desperately as the figure closed the distance between them, striking a glancing blow that sent the attacker stumbling backward with a muffled grunt of pain. Footsteps thundered down the corridor as guards rushed toward the chamber, drawn by her screams. The hooded figure, recognizing the danger of remaining any longer, turned and fled through a side passage, just as the doors burst open, revealing Alaric himself at the head of the guards, his expression twisted with fury and fear as he took in the scene before him. Elena, he crossed the room in 3 swift strides, gripping her shoulders and searching her face for any sign of injury. "Are you hurt?" "I am fine," she managed, though her voice trembled with the aftermath of adrenaline and fear. "Someone attacked me." They fled through that passage before the guards arrived. Alaric's expression hardened into something dangerous as he turned to bark orders at his guards, sending them in pursuit of the fleeing attacker, though something in his tone suggested he already suspected the search would prove fruitless. Whoever had attacked Elena had clearly planned their escape route carefully, another sign of the calculated intelligence behind this entire conspiracy. As the guards dispersed to search the palace grounds, Alaric remained beside Elena, his hands still resting gently on her shoulders, his eyes filled with a concern that went beyond simple duty or obligation. "I should never have left you here alone," he said quietly. "This is my failure, not yours." "You cannot protect everyone from everything," Elena replied, though she found herself grateful for his presence, despite her attempt at composure. "But this confirms what we already suspected. Someone is desperate to stop our investigation, desperate enough to risk attacking me directly within your own palace walls." Alaric nodded grimly, understanding the implications clearly. Whoever was responsible for the poisoning had grown increasingly reckless, and reckless enemies, however dangerous, often made mistakes that careful and patient ones would never risk. The question now was whether they could uncover the truth before that recklessness claimed another victim, or before the traitor within their midst decided that Elena's continued survival posed too great a risk to their carefully constructed scheme. The search for Elena's attacker stretched through the entire night without success, the guards returning empty-handed as dawn broke over the palace grounds. Alaric refused to leave her side during those long hours, insisting she rest within a heavily guarded chamber near his own quarters, rather than return to the healing wing, where the attack had occurred. "You cannot stay awake protecting me forever," Elena said, watching him pace restlessly near the window as the first light of morning filtered through the curtains. "You have a kingdom to run." "My kingdom will survive one sleepless night," Alaric replied, though exhaustion had begun to show clearly in the lines of his face. "What concerns me is that someone within these walls felt confident enough to attack you directly. That confidence suggests they believe themselves protected, perhaps by position, perhaps by influence within the court." Elena understood his meaning immediately. "You believe Callum ordered the attack himself, or arranged for someone else to carry it out?" "I believe nothing without proof," Alaric said carefully, though his tone suggested his suspicions had already solidified beyond simple doubt. "But I intend to find that proof, regardless of how long it takes, or how carefully I must move to secure it." That proof arrived sooner than either of them anticipated, though not through the methods they had originally planned. 2 days later, one of Alaric's most trusted scouts returned from the Northern Territories, having successfully tracked down the traitor whose signature appeared alongside Callum's authorization in the merchant ledger. The traitor, a nervous man named Edwin Marsh, was brought before Alaric and Elena in a private chamber, away from the prying eyes and ears of the wider court. His hands shook visibly as he stood before the king, clearly terrified of the consequences awaiting whatever truth he was about to reveal. "Please, your majesty," Edwin stammered. "I meant no harm. I simply sold what was requested. I did not know how the substance would be used." "Tell me exactly what was requested," Alaric said, his voice deceptively calm, despite the tension radiating from every line of his posture. Edwin swallowed hard before continuing. "A rare compound from the northern mountains, one known among alchemists for its unusual properties. Lord Callum contacted me personally, through a private letter, requesting a significant quantity delivered discreetly to a location outside the palace walls. He paid handsomely for my silence regarding the transaction." Elena felt a surge of vindication mixed with dread as she listened to the confirmation of everything they had suspected. Did Lord Callum explain why he needed such a substance? He claimed it was for research purposes, Edwin said. Something about studying rare poisons to better protect the kingdom against potential threats. I had no reason to question his explanation at the time, given his position within the court. Alaric's expression darkened considerably at this admission, the careful mask of calm authority he had maintained finally cracking, to reveal the fury simmering beneath. You will provide a written and signed statement detailing everything you have told us. This testimony may prove crucial in exposing a traitor within my own court. Edwin agreed readily, clearly eager to distance himself from any further involvement in whatever conspiracy his transaction had helped enable. Once his statement was recorded and secured, Alaric dismissed him, with strict instructions to remain within the palace grounds until further notice, ensuring the traitor would be available should additional testimony become necessary. With Edwin's confession secured, Elena and Alaric now possessed concrete evidence linking Callum directly to the poison responsible for the suffering spreading across multiple villages. Yet Alaric remained cautious, understanding that exposing such a prominent advisor required careful timing and irrefutable proof, lest Callum find some way to twist the situation to his advantage once more. We cannot simply confront him with this evidence, Alaric said, as he and Elena discussed their next steps within the privacy of his study. Callum is intelligent and resourceful. If he senses we are closing in, he may attempt to destroy any remaining evidence, or worse, escape the kingdom entirely before facing justice. Then we need to catch him in the act of continuing his scheme, Elena suggested. If he believes his plot remains undiscovered, he may grow careless enough to reveal himself completely. Alaric considered this for a long moment before nodding slowly. We could stage a situation that forces his hand, something that would compel him to act again, while we watch closely enough to catch him directly. Over the following days, they carefully constructed a plan designed to expose Callum's continued involvement in the poisoning scheme. Elena would publicly announce her discovery of a cure for the mysterious illness, information that, if true, would significantly undermine whatever goal Callum hoped to achieve through the poisoning. If he truly wished to continue his scheme, such news would likely provoke a reaction. Perhaps an attempt to silence Elena once more, or further poisoning meant to demonstrate his continued reach despite her efforts. The announcement was made during a gathering of the court, Elena standing beside Alaric as she detailed her successful treatment method for the villages affected by the strange illness. She watched Callum carefully throughout her speech, noting the subtle tension that crossed his features, quickly masked behind practiced composure. "This is remarkable news," Callum said smoothly, once Elena finished speaking. "The kingdom owes you a debt of gratitude for such tireless work, healer." His words carried polite praise, yet Elena sensed something calculating beneath the surface, an awareness that his carefully constructed scheme now faced significant complications. She said nothing to reveal her suspicions, simply nodding graciously at his compliment, while continuing to watch him closely for any sign that might betray his next move. That evening, as planned, Alaric arranged for a private meeting between himself and several trusted guards, positioned discreetly throughout the palace grounds, to monitor any unusual activity. Elena remained within her chamber, ostensibly resting after the day's announcement, though in truth, she remained alert and watchful, prepared for whatever might unfold in the hours ahead. Her vigilance proved justified when, well past midnight, she noticed a shadow moving cautiously outside her window, someone attempting to approach her chamber without drawing attention from the guards stationed nearby. Elena remained still, watching carefully as the figure worked to force open a side entrance she had deliberately left appearing unlocked as part of their plan. The moment the figure stepped inside, guards emerged swiftly from their hidden positions, surrounding the intruder before they could react or escape. Elena rose from where she had been waiting, watching as the guards forced back the hood concealing the intruder's identity, revealing not Callum himself, but one of his personal attendants, a man Elena recognized from previous encounters within the court. "Take him to the throne room," Alaric commanded, arriving swiftly upon hearing the commotion. "I want answers immediately." The captured attendant, clearly terrified and understanding the futility of continued deception, quickly confessed under Alaric's stern questioning. He revealed that Callum had ordered him to eliminate Elena permanently, fearing that her successful cure and growing influence within the kingdom threatened to expose his entire scheme before he could complete whatever larger plan he had been orchestrating. "What larger plan?" Alaric demanded, his voice carrying an edge of barely controlled fury. The attendant hesitated, clearly weighing the consequences of complete honesty against whatever loyalty remained toward his employer. Finally, fear of the king's wrath overcame his hesitation, and he began revealing details that painted a far more dangerous picture than either Elena or Alaric had anticipated. Lord Callum has been in contact with representatives from the rival kingdom of Vaerith, the attendant confessed. He has been working to weaken Blackthorn from within, believing that a kingdom crippled by disease, suspicion, and internal chaos would prove easier for Vaerith to conquer or manipulate to their advantage. Elena felt a cold chill settle over her at this revelation. What had begun as a personal vendetta against her had evolved into something far more dangerous, a calculated betrayal that threatened the very stability and safety of the entire kingdom. Alaric's expression, meanwhile, had transformed into something colder and more dangerous than Elena had yet witnessed, the full weight of this treachery settling heavily upon him. "Where is Callum now?" Alaric asked, his voice deadly quiet. "I do not know his exact location tonight, Your Majesty," the attendant admitted. "He instructed me to complete this task and report back to him privately once finished." Alaric turned to his guards immediately, issuing swift commands to search the palace grounds and secure every exit, determined to prevent Callum from escaping before facing justice for his betrayal. Elena watched as the palace transformed within minutes, guards moving with urgent purpose throughout every corridor, torches illuminating corners that had remained shadowed and unremarkable mere hours earlier. "We need to move quickly," Elena said, following closely as Alaric strode purposefully through the palace, coordinating the search with practiced efficiency despite the late hour. "If Callum realizes his attempt on my life has failed, he may attempt something even more desperate." "I am aware," Alaric replied grimly, "which is precisely why we cannot allow him the opportunity to regroup or escape. Whatever connections he has cultivated with Vaerith, we must sever them before they can be used against this kingdom." As guards continued their search throughout the sprawling palace grounds, Elena found herself walking alongside Alaric with a strange sense of unity she had not expected to feel toward the man who had once condemned her without hesitation. Whatever distance had once separated them, born from suspicion and fear, had gradually eroded through days of shared purpose and mutual respect, earned through trial rather than simple declaration. "Thank you," Alaric said quietly, as they paused briefly near an intersection of corridors, while guards continued their search elsewhere. "For everything you have done these past days. I know I gave you little reason to extend such loyalty toward a kingdom that treated you so poorly upon your arrival." Elena studied him for a long moment before responding. "I did not do this for the kingdom alone, Alaric. I did this because innocent people were suffering, and because somewhere along the way, I began to believe that you truly wished to protect them, despite the mistakes that led us here." Something passed between them in that quiet moment, an understanding that went beyond simple gratitude or professional cooperation, though neither dared name it directly amid the urgency of their current crisis. Before either could speak further, a guard came rushing toward them, breathless and urgent. "Your Majesty," the guard reported, "we have located Lord Callum. He has barricaded himself within the eastern tower, alongside several loyal guards, refusing to surrender. He claims he holds information vital to the kingdom's survival, and demands to speak with you directly before taking any further action." Alaric's expression hardened with fresh determination, and Elena felt her own pulse quicken with anticipation of whatever confrontation awaited them within that tower. The traitor had finally been cornered, but a cornered enemy, particularly one desperate enough to betray his own kingdom, remained capable of far greater danger than anyone within these palace walls had yet witnessed. The eastern tower loomed ahead, as Alaric led a contingent of guards through the narrow palace corridors, Elena following closely despite the danger clearly awaiting them. Torchlight flickered against stone walls, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist with every hurried step they took, toward the confrontation now unavoidable. "You should remain behind the guards," Alaric said, glancing back at Elena with obvious concern. "Callum has already attempted to eliminate you once. I will not risk giving him another opportunity." "I have come this far," Elena replied firmly. "I will not hide now, not when we are finally close to exposing the truth completely." Alaric studied her for a moment, clearly weighing his own protective instincts against the determination burning in her eyes. Finally, he nodded once, though he positioned himself deliberately between her and the tower entrance as they approached. The heavy wooden door to the eastern tower stood closed, guards loyal to Callum visible through narrow windows, weapons drawn and expressions tense. Alaric raised a hand, signaling his own men to hold their positions, as he stepped forward alone, his voice carrying clearly through the night air. "Callum," he called out, "this ends now. Surrender, and I promise you a fair hearing before the court. Continue this resistance, and you leave me no choice but to treat this as the treason it clearly represents." A long silence followed, before the door creaked open slightly, revealing Callum standing just beyond the threshold, his usual composed demeanor replaced by something far more desperate and calculating. "Fair hearing," he repeated with a bitter laugh. "You mean a hearing where your healer's testimony condemns me before I speak a single word in my own defense?" "You poisoned innocent villagers," Alaric said, his voice hardening. "You attempted to have Elena murdered within my own palace. You conspired with Vayrith against your own kingdom. There is no defense that erases such betrayal." Callum's eyes flickered toward Elena, standing just behind Alaric's shoulder, and something dangerous crossed his features. Perhaps if your precious healer had never arrived, none of this would have been necessary. She disrupted plans years in the making, plans meant to secure this kingdom's future against threats far greater than she understands. "Threats you created yourself," Elena said, stepping forward despite Alaric's protective stance. "You poisoned your own people to weaken this kingdom, all to serve some arrangement with a rival power. That is not protection, Callum. That is betrayal of everything you swore to serve." For a moment, something almost like doubt flickered across Callum's face, though it vanished quickly, replaced by cold resolve. Vayrith offered something Blackthorn never could: recognition, power beyond simply serving a king who took my counsel for granted while surrounding himself with new faces and new loyalties. His eyes cut sharply toward Elena as he spoke, the resentment in his voice unmistakable. "This was never about the kingdom's safety," Alaric said quietly, understanding dawning across his features. "This was about your own ambition, your own wounded pride." Callum's expression twisted with something between anger and desperation. "You have no idea what it means to serve faithfully for decades, only to watch a stranger arrive and earn your trust within mere weeks. I built this kingdom's foundations alongside your father, Alaric. I deserved more than being cast aside." "No one cast you aside," Alaric said firmly. "You chose this path yourself, the moment you decided innocent lives were an acceptable price for your own ambition." The tension within the tower entrance grew thick, as Callum's loyal guards shifted uneasily, clearly uncertain whether to continue defending a cause that increasingly revealed itself as indefensible. Elena watched carefully, sensing the fragile balance of the confrontation, teetering toward its inevitable conclusion. "It does not have to end this way," Alaric said, softening his tone slightly, though his eyes remained hard and unwavering. "Surrender now, and I will ensure your family remains protected from whatever consequences follow. Continue this resistance, and I cannot guarantee such mercy extends beyond yourself." Something in the mention of family seemed to finally break through Callum's desperate resolve. His shoulders sagged slightly, the fight visibly draining from his posture, as he glanced back toward his remaining guards, who watched him with expressions caught between loyalty and growing doubt. "Lower your weapons," Callum finally said quietly to his men. "This ends here." The guards hesitated only briefly before complying, weapons clattering softly against stone as they stepped back from the tower entrance. Callum himself stepped forward slowly, hands raised in surrender, though his eyes carried a weight of bitter resignation rather than genuine remorse. Alaric's own guards moved swiftly to secure Callum, binding his hands as Alaric watched with an expression Elena could not quite decipher. Relief mixed with something heavier, the sorrow of watching someone once trusted reveal themselves as an enemy from within. "Take him to the dungeons," Alaric commanded, his voice steady, despite the visible weight of the moment. "He will await trial before the full court, where all evidence against him will be presented openly." As guards led Callum away, his eyes met Elena's one final time, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that whatever game he had played had finally reached its conclusion, undone ultimately by the very healer he had tried so desperately to eliminate. Once Callum had been secured within the dungeon, Alaric turned to Elena, exhaustion and relief mixing visibly across his features. "It is over," he said quietly. The traitor within my court has finally been exposed. Not entirely over, Elena reminded him gently. We still need to ensure his connections with Varith are fully severed, and the villages still recovering from the poison need continued treatment until the illness is completely eradicated. Alaric nodded, understanding the continued work still required, despite this significant victory. Then we will address each challenge as it comes. Tonight, however, allow this kingdom a moment to breathe, knowing the immediate danger has finally passed. They stood together in comfortable silence for a long moment, the weight of recent days settling into something resembling peace, however temporary. Elena found herself studying Alaric's profile in the torchlight, noticing details she had not permitted herself to acknowledge during the frantic urgency of recent events. The strength in his jaw, the quiet vulnerability occasionally visible beneath his commanding presence. "You fought for me," she said softly, breaking the silence. "Despite everything that happened between us initially, you believed me enough to risk your own standing within the court." Alaric turned to face her fully, something gentle replacing the hardness that had characterized his expression throughout the confrontation with Callum. "I made a grave mistake imprisoning you, without proper investigation. Watching you these past days, witnessing your dedication toward people who had shown you nothing but suspicion, taught me more about true loyalty and character than years surrounded by advisors like Callum ever did." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, though she remained cautious, uncertain how much to allow herself to feel toward a man whose position and power created complications neither of them had yet fully addressed. "You still owe me that fair trial," she reminded him, attempting to lighten the sudden intensity of the moment. A genuine smile finally broke across Alaric's features, the first she had witnessed since her imprisonment began. "Indeed I do, though I suspect, but given everything you have accomplished these past days, such a trial will conclude rather quickly in your favor." "We shall see," Elena replied, though she could not entirely suppress her own smile in response. As they finally made their way back toward the main palace, the eastern sky beginning to lighten with the first hints of approaching dawn, Elena allowed herself a rare moment of genuine hope. The immediate crisis had been resolved, the traitor exposed and captured, and whatever complicated feelings had begun developing between herself and the king who had once condemned her, now stood poised at the edge of something neither of them fully understood, yet neither seemed inclined to resist entirely. Yet even as relief settled over the palace grounds, Elena could not shake a lingering unease. Callum had mentioned Varith's involvement so casually, so confidently, that she wondered exactly how deep those connections truly extended, and whether capturing one traitor within the court had truly eliminated the danger, or merely delayed a threat still gathering strength beyond Blackthorn's borders. A commotion erupted outside the dungeon just before dawn, jolting Elena from the light sleep she had finally managed to find after the long night's confrontation. She rose quickly, throwing a cloak over her shoulders and hurrying toward the source of the disturbance, her heart pounding with fresh alarm. Guards rushed past her in the corridor, their faces tight with urgency, and Elena felt dread settle heavily in her stomach as she followed them toward the dungeon entrance. She arrived to find Alaric already there, standing over the unconscious form of a guard, while several others secured the area with drawn weapons. "What happened?" Elena asked, kneeling briefly to check the fallen guard's pulse before rising to face Alaric. "Someone attempted to reach Callum's cell during the night," Alaric said grimly. "This guard was struck from behind. He will recover, but whoever did this clearly intended to either free Callum or ensure his silence permanently." Elena's mind raced immediately to the implications. Varith. They must have agents within the kingdom, perhaps even within this palace, working to protect their investment in Callum's scheme. Alaric nodded, his expression darkening further. "Which means this threat extends far beyond one traitor within my court. I need to know exactly how deep these connections run before Callum's trial proceeds. Otherwise we risk exposing this kingdom to further attacks from those desperate to keep their involvement hidden." They moved quickly to check on Callum himself, finding him shaken but unharmed within his cell, though his expression carried a strange mixture of fear and grim satisfaction when Alaric questioned him about the attempted intrusion. "They came to silence me," Callum admitted quietly, his earlier defiance replaced by something more subdued. "I suspected they might, once my capture became known. Varith does not tolerate loose threads, even those who serve their interests faithfully." "Then help us," Elena said, stepping forward, despite Alaric's questioning glance. "Tell us everything about your arrangement with Vayrith. If they are willing to kill you to protect their secrets, perhaps exposing those secrets is your best chance at survival." Callum studied her for a long moment, something calculating still present beneath his fear, though genuine consideration seemed to be forming as well. "Very well," he finally said, "but I will speak only to the king directly, and only with guarantees regarding my own safety moving forward." Alaric agreed to the terms, and over the following hours, Callum revealed details of his arrangement with Vayrith that painted an increasingly alarming picture. The rival kingdom had been cultivating agents within Blackthorn's court for years, patiently building networks of influence and information meant to weaken the kingdom from within, before any direct confrontation became necessary. "There are others," Callum admitted reluctantly. "I do not know all their identities. Communication was always carefully compartmentalized to protect the network should anyone be discovered. But I know Vayrith intended this poisoning to be merely the beginning, a demonstration of vulnerability, meant to pave the way for a larger operation still to come." Elena felt a chill settle over her at this revelation. What larger operation? "I was never given complete details," Callum said. "Only that Vayrith intended to exploit whatever chaos and distrust the poisoning created, using it as cover for something far more significant. Perhaps an assassination, perhaps direct military action, while the kingdom remained distracted by internal crisis." Alaric's jaw tightened at this information, understanding immediately the danger such uncertainty represented. "We need to identify these remaining agents before Vayrith can execute whatever plan they have prepared. Callum, is there anything else, any detail however small, that might help us uncover their identities?" Callum considered carefully before answering. There was a symbol, used in correspondence to authenticate messages from Vayrith's network. A small mark, a crescent moon crossed by a single arrow. Those loyal to their cause would recognize it immediately, though I never knew how many others within this court might carry such a mark somewhere on their person or belongings. This detail, however small, provided Elena and Alaric with their first concrete lead toward uncovering the remaining threat still lurking within the palace. Over the following days, they worked carefully and discreetly, examining correspondence, questioning trusted guards, and searching for any sign of the symbol Callum had described. Their investigation proceeded delicately, aware that any misstep might alert remaining agents before they could be properly identified and contained. Elena found herself increasingly drawn into the political intricacies of court life during this period, working alongside Alaric not simply as a healer, but as a trusted advisor, whose insight and judgment he had come to value deeply. Their partnership during these tense days brought them closer together in ways neither had fully anticipated. Long hours spent reviewing documents and discussing strategy gradually revealed layers of each other's character that circumstances had previously obscured. Elena discovered a man far more thoughtful and burdened by responsibility than the harsh king who had first condemned her, while Alaric found himself continually impressed by Elena's sharp intelligence and unwavering compassion, even toward a kingdom that had initially treated her with such suspicion. "I have been thinking," Alaric said one evening, as they paused their work over correspondence within his private study, candlelight flickering softly across scattered documents between them, "about how differently I might have handled everything, had I trusted my instincts rather than allowing fear to guide my judgment." Elena looked up from the letter she had been examining, meeting his gaze with quiet understanding. "Fear makes fools of even the wisest rulers, Alaric. What matters now is how you choose to move forward, not the mistakes that brought us to this point." "You forgive easily," he observed softly, "for someone who spent days chained within my dungeon, based on false accusations." "I forgive, because holding on to anger serves no purpose beyond poisoning my own heart," Elena replied, "and because I have come to understand you as more than the king who imprisoned me. I see now the weight you carry, the constant vigilance required to protect a kingdom surrounded by threats both visible and hidden." Something shifted in Alaric's expression as he studied her across the candlelit study, an openness Elena had not witnessed from him previously, vulnerability he rarely permitted himself to display before others. "You have become invaluable to me, Elena, not simply for your skills as a healer, but for your wisdom, your courage, and honestly, for qualities I find myself increasingly drawn toward beyond simple gratitude." Elena felt her pulse quicken at his words, understanding clearly the meaning beneath his careful phrasing. Alaric, we are in the middle of uncovering a conspiracy that threatens your entire kingdom. Perhaps this is not the appropriate moment for such conversations. Perhaps not, he agreed, though he made no move to retract his words or distance himself from the moment developing between them. But given how quickly circumstances within this kingdom seem to shift, I find myself unwilling to delay expressing feelings I have come to recognize as genuine, regardless of how complicated our circumstances remain. The tension between them stretched taut, neither quite willing to close the remaining distance separating their positions across the study, yet neither entirely able to look away from the significance of the moment building steadily around them. Before either could speak further, however, a sharp knock at the door shattered the fragile intimacy, drawing them both back toward the urgent reality of their ongoing investigation. A guard entered hurriedly, bearing news that immediately refocused their attention away from personal matters and back toward the growing danger still threatening the kingdom. Your Majesty, we have discovered something troubling within the eastern barracks. A soldier was found carrying correspondence bearing the symbol Lord Callum described, along with documents suggesting further coordination with agents outside our borders. Alaric rose immediately, his earlier vulnerability replaced swiftly by the commanding authority his position demanded. Bring him to the throne room immediately. I want answers before this network can react to his discovery. As they hurried toward the throne room together, Elena found herself grateful for the interruption, despite the unresolved tension it left lingering between them. Whatever feelings continued developing between herself and Alaric would require careful consideration once this immediate crisis had finally passed. But for now, the safety of an entire kingdom demanded their complete attention, and neither could afford distraction, while agents of Vayrith remained hidden somewhere within these very walls, waiting patiently for their opportunity to strike. The captured soldier stood trembling before the throne, flanked by two guards who held his arms firmly despite his obvious lack of resistance. Elena studied his face, noting the fear evident in his wide eyes, though something else lingered there as well. A resignation that suggested he understood exactly how much trouble his discovery represented. Explain this, Alaric demanded, holding up the intercepted correspondence bearing the crescent moon and arrow symbol Callum had described days earlier. Who gave you these documents, and what exactly have you been coordinating with Vayrith? The soldier, a young man named Garrett Holloway, hesitated only briefly before answering, clearly recognizing the futility of continued denial. I was recruited nearly a year ago, Your Majesty. A merchant approached me during leave, offering payment in exchange for information about palace security rotations and troop movements. I did not know initially that he represented Vayrith's interests, only that the payment was generous enough to ease my family's struggles during a difficult winter. And once you learned the truth? Alaric pressed, his voice hard with barely restrained anger. Garrett's shoulders sagged further. By then, I had already provided information I could not take back. They threatened to expose my involvement, ruining my standing and endangering my family, unless I continued cooperating. I have been passing minor details ever since, though I swear I knew nothing about the poisoning until after it had already begun. Elena watched Alaric carefully, recognizing the difficult position such testimony created. Garrett was clearly a victim of circumstance, as much as a willing conspirator, manipulated through desperation, rather than genuine malice toward his kingdom. What do you know about their larger plan? Elena asked, stepping forward despite the formal setting of the throne room. Callum mentioned Vayrith intended something significant beyond simply poisoning villages. What have you heard? Garrett glanced nervously toward Alaric before answering. There were whispers, nothing concrete, about a larger force gathering near our northern border. I believe Vayrith intends to use the chaos created by recent events as cover for an actual invasion, striking while Blackthorn remains distracted by internal conspiracy and recovery efforts. The chamber fell into stunned silence at this revelation. An invasion represented a threat far beyond anything they had previously considered, transforming what had begun as an internal investigation into something that now threatened the very survival of the entire kingdom. How soon? Alaric demanded, his composure straining visibly under the weight of this new information. I do not know precisely, Garrett admitted, but based on fragments of information I overheard, I believe their preparations are nearly complete. Perhaps days, perhaps weeks at most, before they move against us directly. Alaric turned immediately to his assembled advisors and military commanders, issuing swift commands to reinforce the northern border and gather intelligence regarding Vayrith's troop movements. The urgency that had characterized their investigation into the poisoning now expanded exponentially, encompassing preparations for what might become open warfare between the two kingdoms. As the throne room emptied of guards dispatching to fulfill Alaric's orders, Elena remained behind, watching him carefully, as the weight of this new threat settled visibly across his shoulders. "This changes everything," she said quietly, once they were finally alone. "Yes," Alaric agreed, running a hand through his hair with obvious exhaustion. "What began as an attempt to identify a traitor within my own court has revealed a threat that could cost countless lives if we fail to prepare adequately. I cannot allow Blackthorn to fall victim to Vayrith's ambitions, not after everything my people have already suffered." Elena moved closer, placing a steady hand on his arm, offering what comfort she could amid the mounting crisis. "You are not facing this alone, Alaric. Whatever preparations are needed, whatever knowledge or skills I possess that might prove useful, I will stand beside you throughout this challenge." He looked down at her hand resting against his arm, then met her eyes with an intensity that momentarily overshadowed even the weight of impending war. "I find myself continually grateful for your presence, Elena, more than words can adequately express." Their moment of quiet connection was interrupted by the return of one of Alaric's military commanders, a stern woman named Bridget Ashworth, who had served the kingdom faithfully for over 2 decades. Her expression carried grim determination as she addressed the king directly. "Your Majesty, scouts report unusual activity along our northern border, confirming the soldiers' testimony. Vayrith forces appear to be massing in greater numbers than previously observed. I recommend we begin full mobilization immediately, alongside diplomatic efforts to potentially delay their advance while we strengthen our defenses." Alaric nodded firmly, his earlier vulnerability replaced once more by decisive leadership. "Begin mobilization immediately. I will personally lead a delegation to attempt diplomatic negotiations, though I hold little hope Vayrith will honor any agreement given their clear intentions toward conquest." "Perhaps I should accompany the delegation," Elena suggested. "My knowledge of Vayrith's poison and their methods might prove useful during negotiations, particularly if they attempt to leverage similar tactics during any discussion." Alaric considered this for a moment, before nodding slowly. "Your insight has proven invaluable throughout this entire ordeal. I would welcome your presence, though I must warn you, diplomatic missions to hostile territories carry significant risk." "I have faced significant risk since the moment guards dragged me into your dungeon," Elena replied, with a faint, wry smile. "I am not inclined to shy away from danger now, particularly when the safety of this kingdom hangs in the balance." Preparations for the diplomatic mission proceeded swiftly over the following days, alongside continued military mobilization along the northern border. Elena found herself working alongside Bridget Ashworth and other military advisors, helping prepare medical supplies and treatments should conflict prove unavoidable despite their diplomatic efforts. During this period, Callum remained confined within the dungeon, his earlier cooperation regarding Vayrith's network proving increasingly valuable as additional information came to light. Though his trial had been postponed given the more pressing crisis now facing the kingdom, Alaric had granted him slightly improved conditions in exchange for his continued assistance identifying remaining threats within the court. The night before their departure toward Vayrith's border, Elena found herself unable to sleep, her mind racing through countless scenarios and preparations she might have overlooked. She eventually made her way toward the palace gardens, seeking quiet reflection beneath the stars before the uncertain days ahead. She found Alaric already there, standing alone near a small fountain, his expression distant and troubled as he stared up at the night sky. Elena approached quietly, settling beside him without immediately speaking, offering simply her presence amid his obvious contemplation. "I keep thinking about my father," Alaric finally said, his voice quiet and unusually vulnerable. He always spoke of leadership as a burden meant to be carried with quiet dignity, regardless of how heavy that burden became. "I wonder if I am truly prepared for what lies ahead, for the possibility that countless lives may depend entirely on decisions I make in the coming days. You have already proven yourself capable of adapting, of learning from mistakes, and of fighting fiercely for what you believe is right," Elena said softly. "That is precisely the kind of leadership your people need during times of crisis." Alaric turned to face her fully, moonlight casting soft shadows across his features as he studied her with an expression that combined gratitude, admiration, and something deeper still developing between them, despite the danger surrounding their circumstances. Whatever happens in the coming days, Elena, I want you to know that meeting you, despite the terrible circumstances of our first encounter, has become one of the most significant events of my reign, perhaps of my entire life. Elena felt her heart swell with emotion at his words, understanding clearly the weight and sincerity behind them. Then let us ensure we both survive whatever challenges await, so that we might have the chance to explore exactly what this connection between us might become, once peace is finally restored to this kingdom. He reached out gently, taking her hand in his, and for a moment, amid the quiet garden beneath a canopy of stars, the looming threat of war seemed distant, replaced instead by a fragile yet powerful connection neither of them was willing to abandon, regardless of whatever dangers still lay ahead on their journey toward Vayrith's border. The journey toward Vayrith's border took 3 days, the delegation moving swiftly through changing landscapes as forests gave way to rolling hills, and eventually the rugged terrain, marking the edge of Blackthorn's territory. Elena rode alongside Alaric for much of the journey, their earlier conversation in the garden lingering between them, as an unspoken promise neither had yet found opportunity to fully address. Bridget Ashworth commanded the small contingent of guards accompanying them, her sharp eyes constantly scanning the surrounding terrain for any sign of ambush or unexpected danger. The tension among the group remained palpable throughout the journey, everyone acutely aware of the significant risk involved in approaching hostile territory for negotiations that seemed increasingly unlikely to succeed peacefully. They arrived at the designated meeting point, a neutral clearing near the border, marked by ancient stone pillars that had stood for generations as a boundary between the two kingdoms. Representatives from Vayrith already awaited them, led by a woman named Lady Constance Ravenscroft, whose cold expression and calculating eyes immediately put Elena on edge. "King Alaric," Lady Constance greeted, her tone carrying polite civility that failed to mask the underlying tension. "I trust your journey was uneventful. As uneventful as circumstances allow, given recent revelations regarding Vayrith's involvement in conspiracies against my kingdom," Alaric replied evenly, refusing to allow her false pleasantries to soften the seriousness of their purpose. Lady Constance's expression flickered briefly, before settling back into practiced neutrality. "I am unaware of what conspiracies you reference, Your Majesty. Vayrith seeks only peaceful relations with our neighboring kingdoms." "Then perhaps you can explain the significant military presence gathering along our shared border," Alaric countered sharply, "or the poison traced directly back to agents working within your interests, planted within my own court to weaken Blackthorn from within." The negotiations that followed proved tense and largely unproductive, Lady Constance maintaining careful denial despite the mounting evidence Alaric presented regarding Vayrith's involvement in recent events. Elena watched closely throughout the exchange, noting subtle tells in Lady Constance's expression that suggested calculated deception rather than genuine ignorance of the conspiracy unfolding. As the discussion continued without meaningful progress, Elena noticed something troubling near the edge of the clearing, a slight movement among the trees that seemed inconsistent with the natural rustling of leaves in the afternoon breeze. She leaned closer to Alaric, whispering urgently, "Something is wrong. I believe we are being watched from the tree line, and not simply by Vayrith's usual guards." Alaric's expression remained outwardly calm, though Elena noticed his hand shift subtly toward the weapon concealed beneath his cloak. "Bridget," he said quietly, "position our guards more defensively. I fear this negotiation may be nothing more than a distraction." Bridget acted swiftly, subtly repositioning their small contingent while maintaining the appearance of standard diplomatic protocol. Lady Constance, noticing the shift, offered a thin smile that confirmed Elena's growing suspicion regarding the true purpose behind this meeting. "You seem troubled, King Alaric," Lady Constance observed. "Perhaps the burden of ruling a kingdom plagued by internal betrayal and mysterious illness has left you seeing threats where none truly exist." "Or perhaps," Alaric replied coldly, "I have simply learned to recognize deception when it stands directly before me." The tension shattered suddenly as arrows whistled from the surrounding tree line, forcing the entire delegation into immediate defensive action. Guards scrambled to form protective formations around Alaric, while Elena dropped low, seeking whatever cover the clearing's scattered stones might provide. "Ambush!" Bridget shouted, drawing her weapon as chaos erupted around the previously calm negotiation site. Lady Constance's expression twisted into something colder and more triumphant as she retreated swiftly toward her own guards, revealing clearly that this meeting had indeed been nothing more than an elaborate trap designed to eliminate Alaric while he remained vulnerable outside his own kingdom's protection. Elena's mind raced as she watched the chaos unfold around her, recognizing immediately that this assault carried the same calculated precision she had witnessed in the poisoning scheme weeks earlier. As several attackers emerged from the tree line wielding blades coated in a suspicious dark substance, her suspicion solidified into certain understanding. "Poison!" she shouted urgently toward Alaric, who was engaged in close combat with one of the emerging attackers. "Their blades are coated with toxin. Avoid direct contact if possible." Alaric acknowledged her warning with a sharp nod, adjusting his fighting stance to avoid unnecessary contact with his opponent's weapon while still defending himself effectively. Elena, meanwhile, searched desperately through her satchel for anything that might counter the poison's effects should any of their guards suffer injury during the escalating confrontation. The battle raged fiercely across the clearing, Blackthorn's guards fighting valiantly against the ambush despite being significantly outnumbered by Vayrith's hidden forces. Elena watched in horror as one guard fell, struck by a poisoned blade along his forearm, his face already beginning to pale with the toxin's rapid onset. She rushed toward him immediately, ignoring the danger still surrounding them, and began working quickly to slow the poison's progression, using the same treatment method she had developed during her work in the affected villages. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency despite the chaos surrounding her, mixing herbs and applying pressure to the wound, while guards continued fighting to protect their position. Nearby, Alaric fought with fierce determination, cutting down attacker after attacker, despite the overwhelming numbers arrayed against them. Elena spared brief glances toward him between treating injured guards, her heart pounding with fear each time she witnessed how close he came to serious injury amid the brutal confrontation. Just as the battle seemed poised to overwhelm their smaller contingent entirely, the sound of additional horses thundered from the direction of Blackthorn's border, reinforcements arriving just in time to shift the balance of the confrontation. Bridget had apparently anticipated potential treachery during the negotiations, arranging for a secondary force to remain hidden nearby, ready to respond should the meeting turn hostile. The arrival of reinforcements quickly turned the tide of battle, Vayrith's remaining attackers retreating hastily back across the border as Blackthorn's forces pressed their sudden advantage. Lady Constance had already vanished during the chaos, leaving her forces to face the consequences of her failed ambush alone. As the fighting finally subsided, Elena rushed to check on Alaric, relief flooding through her as she confirmed he had escaped the confrontation with only minor injuries. "You are safe," she breathed, momentarily allowing herself to express the fear that had gripped her throughout the battle. "Thanks to your warning about the poison," Alaric replied, his breathing still heavy from the intense combat. "Had you not recognized the danger, our losses today would have been far more severe." Together, they moved through the aftermath of the battle, Elena continuing to treat injured guards, while Alaric coordinated with Bridget to assess the full scope of what had transpired. The wounded guard Elena had treated earlier showed promising signs of recovery. The poison's progression successfully slowed enough for his body to begin fighting off its effects naturally. "This confirms everything," Alaric said grimly, once the immediate crisis had stabilized. "Vayrith has no genuine interest in peaceful negotiation. Their ambition extends toward conquest, regardless of what diplomatic pretense they maintain publicly." "Then we must prepare for war," Elena said, though the words carried heavy weight, given everything they had already endured. Whatever hope remained for peaceful resolution died within that clearing today. Alaric nodded solemnly, understanding clearly the path now unavoidable before them. "We return to Blackthorn immediately. I need to rally our full military strength and prepare our kingdom for whatever assault Vayrith intends to launch against us." As they mounted their horses for the journey home, Elena found herself reflecting on how dramatically circumstances had shifted since her initial imprisonment weeks earlier. What had begun as a personal fight for her own innocence had transformed into something far larger, a battle for the survival of an entire kingdom, against an enemy determined to exploit any weakness for their own ambitious gain. Despite the danger still looming ahead, Elena felt a quiet resolve settling within her chest as she glanced toward Alaric riding beside her, his expression set with determined purpose, despite the exhaustion evident from their recent battle. Whatever challenges Vayrith intended to bring against Blackthorn, She was prepared to stand beside this king, using every skill and every ounce of courage she possessed to protect the kingdom and the man who had come to mean far more to her than she ever anticipated when guards first dragged her into his dungeon those long weeks ago. Word reached Blackthorn's capital only 2 days after their return from the failed negotiations that Vayrith's forces had begun advancing across the northern border in significant numbers. Alaric wasted no time mobilizing every available soldier, positioning defenses along the most vulnerable approaches to the capital, while messengers rode swiftly to gather additional support from allied territories. Elena worked tirelessly alongside the kingdom's healers, preparing medical supplies and treatments in anticipation of the casualties that seemed increasingly inevitable, given the scale of the approaching conflict. Her experience treating the poison from recent weeks proved invaluable, as reports suggested Vayrith's forces carried similar toxic weapons, intended to inflict maximum suffering upon Blackthorn's defenders. Their scouts have been spotted just beyond the northern ridge, Bridget reported during a tense war council held within the castle's main hall. Based on their formation and numbers, I estimate they intend a direct assault within the next 2 days, likely under cover of darkness, to minimize our defensive advantages. Alaric studied the maps spread across the table before him, his expression grim but focused as he considered their limited options. We cannot match their numbers directly. Our best hope lies in defending the narrow pass leading toward the capital, forcing them to funnel their forces through terrain that limits their numerical advantage. I agree, Bridget said, though holding that position will require every soldier we can spare, and losses will likely be significant, regardless of our tactical advantage. Elena listened carefully throughout the discussion, her mind already working through how her own skills might contribute beyond simply treating casualties after the fact. What if we could counter their poison weapons before the battle even begins? I have been studying the compound extensively these past weeks. If I could develop something to neutralize its effects on contact, perhaps applied directly to our soldiers' armor or weapons, it might significantly reduce the danger they pose. Alaric turned to her immediately, hope flickering behind his tired eyes. Do you believe such a treatment is possible given the time remaining? I believe it is worth attempting, Elena said firmly. I have already identified herbs that neutralize the toxin's effects when treating exposed patients. Applying similar principles preventatively could offer meaningful protection, even if not entirely foolproof. With Alaric's full support, Elena immediately began working with a team of assistants gathered from among the kingdom's healers, laboring through the following day and night to prepare enough of her protective treatment for as many soldiers as possible before the anticipated assault. The work proved exhausting and complex, requiring precise measurements and careful application to ensure effectiveness without compromising the soldiers' mobility or combat readiness. As the sun set on the second day, word arrived that Vayrith's forces had begun their final approach toward the narrow mountain pass Bridget had identified as their primary defensive position. Alaric personally oversaw the deployment of Blackthorn's soldiers, ensuring Elena's protective treatment had been properly applied to as many defenders as time allowed. This might make the difference between victory and devastating losses, Alaric said, finding Elena amid the organized chaos of final preparations as darkness settled fully over the kingdom. Whatever happens tonight, know that your contributions have already saved countless lives that might otherwise have been lost to this conflict. Elena reached out, taking his hand firmly in hers, drawing strength from the connection between them amid the uncertainty of the battle ahead. We face this together, Alaric. Whatever the outcome, I will be here, ready to help however I am needed. He studied her for a long moment, moonlight and torchlight mixing to illuminate the fierce determination and quiet vulnerability present in her expression. I once believed protecting this kingdom meant ruling with unwavering strength alone. You have taught me that true strength includes trusting others enough to share the burden of leadership. Before either could speak further, the distant sound of horns echoing from the northern pass signaled the beginning of Vayrith's assault. Alaric squeezed her hand once more before turning toward his waiting soldiers, his expression transforming swiftly into the commanding presence his kingdom needed during this critical hour. For Blackthorn, he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled defenders as he mounted his horse to lead the defense personally. The soldiers responded with determined resolve, moving swiftly toward their positions within the narrow pass, as the sounds of approaching conflict grew steadily louder. Elena established a treatment area just beyond the immediate battle lines, positioning herself and her assistants to respond quickly to whatever casualties emerged from the fighting ahead. The wait proved agonizing, distant sounds of clashing weapons and shouted commands carrying through the night air as the battle intensified within the pass. The first wounded soldiers began arriving within the hour, and Elena worked with practiced efficiency, treating injuries ranging from minor cuts to severe wounds inflicted by Vayrith's poisoned weapons. She noted with cautious relief that her protective treatment appeared to be working as intended, significantly reducing the severity of poison-related symptoms among soldiers whose armor had been properly treated beforehand. As the battle raged through the night, Elena caught fragmented reports of the conflict's progress, from wounded soldiers and messengers, moving between the front lines and her treatment area. Blackthorn's forces, bolstered by the narrow terrain and Elena's protective measures, were managing to hold their position despite Vayrith's numerical advantage, inflicting heavy losses upon the invading forces, attempting to force their way through the pass. Near dawn, as exhaustion began settling heavily over both sides of the conflict, word reached Elena that Alaric himself had been injured during a particularly fierce exchange near the pass's narrowest point. Her heart seized with fear as she immediately gathered her supplies and rushed toward the front lines, ignoring the protests of guards, attempting to keep her safely behind the defensive perimeter. She found Alaric being supported by 2 soldiers, blood staining his side, where a blade had apparently found a gap in his armor during the fighting. Relief mixed with terror as she rushed to his side, quickly assessing the wound with practiced efficiency despite her racing heart. "It is not poisoned," she confirmed, after careful examination, relief evident in her voice. "The blade struck true, but avoided any toxin. This wound, while serious, can be treated effectively." Alaric managed a weak smile despite obvious pain. "I suspected as much, though I confess your confirmation offers considerable comfort." Elena worked quickly to clean and bind the wound, using techniques she had perfected over years of treating injuries far less dire than the current crisis facing Blackthorn's kingdom. As she worked, reports continued arriving that Vayrith's forces, having suffered devastating losses attempting to breach the narrow pass, had begun a full retreat back toward their own territory. "We held them," Bridget reported, arriving breathless but triumphant as Elena finished tending to Alaric's wound. "Vayrith's remaining forces are retreating. Our defensive position and Elena's protective treatment made the difference. Their casualties far exceed our own." Relief flooded through the assembled soldiers as word of the victory spread quickly across the battlefield, though the cost remained significant, with numerous soldiers on both sides having paid the ultimate price during the fierce overnight conflict. Elena felt the weight of mixed emotions, profound relief at Blackthorn's survival, mixed with sorrow for the lives lost, defending the kingdom against Vayrith's ambitious aggression. As dawn fully broke over the battlefield, revealing the aftermath of the fierce nighttime conflict, Alaric struggled to his feet despite his injury, determined to address his surviving soldiers personally. Elena stayed close beside him, providing support as needed, while he addressed the assembled troops with words of gratitude and recognition for their courage and sacrifice. "Today, Blackthorn stands victorious," Alaric declared, his voice carrying clearly, despite obvious exhaustion and pain. "Not simply through military strength alone, but through the combined efforts of soldiers, healers, and every citizen who refused to allow fear and betrayal to determine our kingdom's fate. We owe this victory to unity, courage, and the willingness to trust in each other, despite whatever doubts circumstances might create." His eyes found Elena's amid the assembled crowd, and something unspoken passed between them, acknowledgement of everything they had endured together since that fateful night in the dungeon weeks earlier. Whatever challenges still remained, addressing Callum's trial, rebuilding what Vayrith's aggression had damaged, and navigating the deepening connection between king and healer, Elena understood clearly that they now faced these challenges together, bound by shared purpose and mutual respect, earned through the fires of genuine crisis rather than simple circumstance alone. 3 weeks passed following Blackthorn's decisive victory against Vayrith's forces, weeks filled with the difficult work of rebuilding, honoring the fallen, and restoring stability to a kingdom that had endured so much turmoil in such a short span of time. Alaric's wound healed steadily under Elena's careful attention, though the physical recovery proved far simpler than the complex political work still required to fully secure the kingdom's future. Callum's long-delayed trial finally proceeded before the full court, the overwhelming evidence against him, including his own detailed confession and the testimony of both Edwin Marsh and Garrett Holloway, leaving little room for doubt regarding his guilt. Elena watched from beside Alaric as the proceedings unfolded, feeling a complex mixture of vindication and sorrow, as the man who had once tried so desperately to destroy her finally faced justice for his betrayal. "Lord Callum," Alaric announced formally before the assembled court, "you stand convicted of treason against this kingdom, of conspiracy with a foreign power, and of attempted murder against an innocent healer who served this kingdom faithfully despite your efforts to destroy her. Given your cooperation in exposing Vayrith's larger network, and in recognition of decades of previous service before your betrayal began, I sentence you to permanent exile rather than execution, though you shall never again set foot within Blackthorn's borders." Callum accepted the sentence with quiet resignation, his earlier defiance long since replaced by weary acceptance of consequences he had ultimately brought upon himself through his own choices. As guards escorted him from the court toward his final departure from the kingdom he had once served so faithfully, Elena felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that the threat he represented had finally been fully neutralized. With Callum's trial concluded, Alaric turned his attention toward addressing the accusations that had originally led to Elena's imprisonment. Standing before the full court, he spoke with clear and unwavering conviction. "Weeks ago, I made a grave error in judgment, allowing fear and manipulation to convince me that Elena Voss posed a threat to this kingdom. I imprisoned an innocent woman, based on false evidence planted by a traitor, seeking to eliminate anyone who might expose his schemes. Elena has since proven herself not merely innocent of these original accusations, but instrumental in saving countless lives from poison, in uncovering the conspiracy that threatened our entire kingdom, and in helping secure our victory against Vayrith's aggression." He turned to face Elena directly, his expression carrying deep sincerity, as he continued addressing the assembled court. "I offer my complete and public apology for the injustice you suffered at my command. This kingdom owes you a debt that mere words cannot adequately express." Elena felt emotions swell within her chest as she listened to his heartfelt acknowledgement, the weight of weeks spent proving her innocence finally settling into genuine resolution before the entire court.
"Thank you, Your Majesty,"
she replied formally, though warmth colored her voice beyond simple diplomatic courtesy. "I understand now that fear and manipulation can cloud even the wisest judgment. What matters is the willingness to seek truth once clarity finally emerges." The court erupted into applause, murmurs of approval rippling through advisors and nobles who had witnessed Elena's tireless dedication throughout the recent crisis. Whatever suspicion had once surrounded her arrival within Blackthorn's borders had been thoroughly replaced by genuine admiration and gratitude for everything she had sacrificed to protect a kingdom that had initially treated her with such distrust. Following the formal proceedings, Alaric requested a private audience with Elena within his study, the same room where so many crucial conversations and decisions had unfolded throughout their shared ordeal. As she entered, she found him standing near the window, gazing out over the kingdom grounds with a contemplative expression. "You have given this kingdom everything," he said quietly, turning to face her as she approached. "Your knowledge saved countless lives. Your courage exposed a traitor who might have otherwise succeeded in his betrayal. Your wisdom helped secure our victory against Vayrith's invasion. I find myself wondering what I might offer in return that could possibly match such extraordinary sacrifice." "You have already offered what matters most," Elena replied softly. "Trust, once earned honestly. Respect, given freely rather than through obligation. And perhaps, if I am not mistaken, something deeper still, that has been growing between us since that very first night in the dungeon, however unlikely such a beginning might have seemed." Alaric closed the distance between them, his expression carrying both hope and lingering uncertainty, despite everything they had already shared. "Elena, these past weeks have taught me more about genuine partnership, about true strength found through vulnerability and trust, than years of ruling this kingdom ever managed to reveal. I find myself unable to imagine facing whatever challenges the future holds, without you standing beside me. Are you asking me to remain within your court as your trusted healer?" Elena asked, though the gentle smile playing at her lips suggested she understood his meaning, extended far beyond simple professional arrangement. "I am asking you to remain as far more than simply my healer," Alaric said, his voice carrying quiet sincerity as he reached for her hand. "I am asking you to consider a future where we face whatever challenges arise together, not merely as king and advisor, but as true partners in every sense of the word. Elena Voss, would you consider becoming my queen, ruling alongside me to protect and serve this kingdom we have both sacrificed so much to defend? Elena felt tears of genuine joy gathering as she considered his heartfelt proposal, understanding clearly the profound journey that had brought them from suspicious adversaries within a darkened dungeon to this moment of vulnerable and genuine connection. "Yes," she said softly, her voice carrying unwavering certainty, despite the emotion evident in her expression. "I would be honored to stand beside you, Alaric, not simply as your queen, but as your equal partner, in protecting everything we have both fought so fiercely to preserve." Their embrace that followed carried the weight of everything they had endured together, relief and joy, mixing with quiet gratitude for circumstances that, despite their painful beginning, had ultimately revealed a connection neither had anticipated finding amid such turbulent crisis. The kingdom celebrated their union in the weeks that followed, the wedding ceremony drawing citizens from every corner of Blackthorn's territory, all eager to witness the joining of their king and the healer whose courage and compassion had ultimately saved their kingdom from both internal betrayal and external conquest. Elena stood before the assembled crowd on her wedding day, dressed in flowing white, adorned with delicate embroidery, representing the healing herbs that had defined her life's work, while Alaric watched with unguarded joy as she approached to join him before the officiant. As they exchanged vows beneath the same sky that had witnessed so much turmoil and triumph throughout their shared journey, Elena reflected on how dramatically her circumstances had transformed since that terrifying night when guards first dragged her into Blackthorn's darkest dungeon. What had begun as false accusation and unjust imprisonment had ultimately revealed her true purpose, not merely as a healer serving a kingdom that once distrusted her, but as a queen destined to rule alongside a king who had learned, through painful experience, the true meaning of trust, justice, and genuine partnership. Their reign together brought lasting peace and prosperity to Blackthorn. Elena's continued dedication to healing and protecting the kingdom's citizens, complementing Alaric's strengthened wisdom and compassion as ruler. Together, they rebuilt what conflict had damaged, strengthened alliances that Varith's aggression had threatened, and ensured that never again would fear and manipulation blind their court to the truth hiding in plain sight. Years later, storytellers throughout the kingdom would speak of Queen Elena, the healer who had once been unjustly imprisoned as her king's greatest suspect, only to ultimately become the very woman who saved his entire kingdom from betrayal, poison, and the threat of foreign conquest. Their story, born from suspicion and injustice yet transformed through courage, wisdom, and genuine love, remained a testament to the power of truth, eventually triumphing over fear, and to the possibility that even the most unlikely beginnings might blossom into something extraordinary and enduring.